The wealthy widow saw a single father returning milk for his baby, but what she did next would cost her far more than money. Helena, Montana, 1892. Snow swept through the streets as Luke Bennett entered a mercantile with his 8-month-old son pressed against his chest. In one hand he carried a dented tin of milk. In the other, only 3 coins. He could feed his child or buy enough firewood to survive the night. He could not do both. The customers looked away as the baby began to cry. But Evelyn Whitmore, the richest widow in town, did not. What followed was not simply an act of kindness. It was a story about pride, grief, courage, and how one wounded family can save another. Stay until the end. Like the video and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The customers looked away, but Evelyn Whitmore did not. She stood near the back of Bell's Mercantile with one gloved hand resting on a tin of imported tea. The store was warm enough that the windows had fogged, yet she could still feel the cold that clung to the man at the counter. Luke Bennett bent to gather the coins scattered near his boots. He kept his son pressed against his chest as he lowered himself, careful not to tilt the baby's head. One knee touched the dirty floorboards. His breath caught either from pain or humiliation. No one stepped forward. A man beside the stove turned his attention to a row of pocket knives. A woman in a fox fur collar studied a flour sack as if it contained something fascinating. Amos Bell stood behind the counter with both hands resting on his ledger. The baby cried again. It was not the full cry of a strong child demanding attention. It was thin and broken, a small sound made by someone already too tired to protest. Luke collected the final coin and pushed himself upright. "Keep the milk," Amos said. "I cannot give you money for damaged goods." Luke stared at the dented tin. "I cannot burn it. That is not my concern." "No," Luke replied quietly. "I suppose it is not." He reached for the tin. The rustle of black silk crossed the room. Evelyn stepped from the aisle and walked toward the counter. The other customers noticed her immediately. In Helena, people always noticed Evelyn Whitmore. She was 44 years old, a widow for nearly a decade, and wealthy enough that men who dismissed most women listened when she cleared her throat. Her late husband had left her Silver Shares commercial property and thousands of acres stretching north of the city. Most people believed that wealth had protected her from suffering. They had never seen the room she kept locked. They had never heard her wake from dreams in which a 6-year-old boy called for her from behind a closed door. Amos straightened as she approached. "Mrs. Whitmore, I did not realize you were still shopping. I was listening." Amos glanced toward Luke. "This is a private account matter. The entire store heard it." Evelyn stopped beside the counter and looked at the infant hidden inside Luke's coat. Only part of the child's face was visible. His skin was pale. His eyelashes were wet. One tiny hand had slipped free of the blanket and curled against his father's shirt. "What is his name?" Evelyn asked. Luke studied her before answering. "Noah. How old is he? 8 months." Evelyn looked at Amos. "How much does Mr. Bennett owe?" Luke's expression hardened. "I did not ask you to pay it." "No," Evelyn said, "you did not." She opened the small velvet purse hanging from her wrist and placed a gold coin on the counter. The sound was light, but it seemed to silence the room. Amos picked it up and turned it toward the lamp. "This is considerably more than the balance. Then bring 6 tins of milk, 2 wool blankets, lamp oil oatmeal beans, and enough firewood for 1 month." Amos blinked. Luke stepped between her and the counter. "Put the coin away." His voice remained low, but the words carried through the store. A few customers shifted closer. Evelyn met his gaze. Luke's eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. There was coal dust beneath his fingernails and a healing cut near his temple. His coat was too thin for the weather, but he had wrapped Noah in nearly every layer he owned. "I will repay the store," Luke said, "when I find work. The child is hungry now. That does not make his hunger your responsibility." "No," Evelyn said. "It makes it impossible for me to pretend I did not see it." Luke's jaw tightened. "I do not take charity, then do not." Confusion passed across his face. Evelyn turned to Amos. "Bring me the employment ledger." Amos looked from Evelyn to Luke. "My employment ledger, the book where you keep the names of carpenters, stablemen, laborers, and groundskeepers seeking work." "I know which ledger you mean. I am asking why you want it." Evelyn looked again at Luke's hands. The knuckles were scarred. The palms were thick with old calluses. A thin line of sawdust remained in the seam of one thumb despite the dirt and cold. "What work did you do at the mine?" she asked. "Carpentry, supports, sheds, carts, roof frames, anything made of timber." "Can you repair fences?" "Yes, a stone chimney if the foundation is sound. A well I can clear one. Fruit trees." Luke hesitated. "My father had an orchard in Missouri." Evelyn faced Amos. "I am not buying his groceries. I am hiring him." The words moved through the store in whispers. Luke stared at her. "You do not know me. That can be corrected. You know nothing about my character. I know you tried to return your child's food because you believed cold would kill him before hunger did. I know you refused more than you thought you had earned. I know you covered him with your coat before covering yourself. That does not make me trustworthy." "No," Evelyn said, "but it makes you worth speaking to." Luke looked toward the customers gathered near the stove. Their interest had become more painful than their indifference. He lifted Noah higher against his chest. "I will not stand here while people discuss whether I am fit to be purchased." Evelyn's expression changed. "No one is purchasing you. It may look different from where you stand." The words were sharp, but she accepted them without flinching. "You are right," she said, "so we will leave." She turned toward the front windows. Her carriage waited outside the black roof already covered in snow. Isaac Cole sat high on the driver's bench with his collar raised against the wind. Luke looked at the supplies Amos had begun gathering. "I cannot pay for those. They have already been paid for. Then give them to someone else." Evelyn stepped closer, keeping her voice low enough that the others had to strain to hear. "Your son needs milk. You need work. I have both." Luke looked down at Noah. The child's cries had weakened into small, breathless sounds. Evelyn waited. At last, Luke picked up the first tin of milk. "Only enough for tonight. We will discuss the rest somewhere warmer. My home is not warm. Then show me." The door opened and winter swept through the store. Isaac climbed down from the driver's bench as they emerged. He was a tall black man in his early 60s, with silver at his temples and the quiet posture of someone who had spent a lifetime seeing more than he said. He took one look at Luke and Noah, then opened the carriage door. Luke stopped. "My boots will ruin the carpet." Isaac glanced at the muddy leather. "Carpets can be cleaned." Luke still hesitated. Evelyn stepped inside first. The choice was now his. Snow gathered on Noah's blanket. Luke climbed into the carriage. Isaac loaded the milk blankets, food, and firewood into the rear compartment. Amos watched from the mercantile doorway, one hand still gripping the gold coin. The carriage rolled away from Last Chance Gulch and entered the darker streets near the rail yards. Luke sat stiffly across from Evelyn. He kept his boots planted on the narrow strip of bare wood beneath the seat. Noah rested beneath the new wool blanket, his cheek against Luke's chest. The warmth slowly softened the child's breathing. For several blocks, neither adult spoke. Outside, gas lamps faded behind curtains of snow. Stone buildings gave way to wooden warehouses, freight sheds, and rows of narrow houses with patched roofs. Evelyn watched Luke adjust the blanket. "You have held him like that for a long time." Luke looked up. "Like what?" As though putting him down might cause him to disappear. Something closed behind his eyes. "He sleeps better against a heartbeat." His mother's mine now. The carriage wheels struck a rut. Luke placed one hand behind Noah's head. Evelyn looked through the window. What was her name? Clara. How long has she been gone? 8 months? Evelyn turned back to him. Luke understood the calculation. She died the day after he was born. I am sorry. He looked down at the blanket. People say that because there is nothing else to say. Sometimes there is nothing else. Luke seemed surprised by the answer. He brushed his thumb across Noah's temple. We were living outside Granite. The camp had one doctor, but he was 20 miles away when her labor started. Rain washed out the south road. By the time he arrived, the fever had already taken hold. His voice remained even. Only his hand betrayed him tightening around the edge of the blanket. She held Noah once. Evelyn said nothing. She asked whether he had my eyes. Does he know? Luke looked at his son's face. He has hers. The carriage turned onto a road lined with telegraph poles and low workers' houses. Luke leaned toward the window. Take the next road on the left." Isaac guided the horses away from the main track. The road became little more than frozen mud between shacks built from scrap lumber packing crates and flattened sheets of metal. Smoke leaked through broken stovepipes. Pieces of cloth had been nailed across windows where glass was missing. Children stopped playing when the carriage appeared. One boy held a lump of coal under his shirt. A barefoot girl carried a bucket with both hands, her steps careful on the ice. Evelyn had passed the settlement many times. She had never entered it. "Here," Luke said. Isaac stopped beside a narrow shack leaning against an abandoned freight building. Luke opened the carriage door before anyone could assist him. The wind hit Noah's blanket. Luke turned his back to it immediately and hurried toward the shack. Evelyn followed. Her boots sank into mud hidden beneath the snow. Isaac came behind them carrying the crate of supplies. Luke pushed open the door. The room inside was colder than the carriage house at Evelyn's estate. A rusted stove stood against one wall. 2 pieces of firewood lay beside it. A mattress filled with straw occupied the corner. Near the opposite wall sat a small cradle made from rough shipping boards. The cradle had been carefully sanded. A carpenter's tool chest stood beneath the only window. There was 1 chair, 1 cup, and a small iron pot. A photograph had been tucked into a crack between the wall boards. The woman in it had light eyes and a wide, unguarded smile. Clara. Luke laid Noah in the cradle and began building a fire. Evelyn stood near the door, unable to remove her coat. The wind passed through gaps in the walls and stirred strands of Clara's photograph. Isaac set down the supplies. Luke opened the crate and removed 1 blanket, 2 tins of milk, a sack of oatmeal, and a bundle of wood. He pushed the rest toward Isaac. "Take those back." Evelyn stared at him. "That food was purchased for you. We have enough for several days. You have no meat. We have beans. 2 pieces of firewood were all that stood between your child and a freezing room. And now we have more." Luke carried one of the remaining food sacks toward the door. 3 children watched from the neighboring shack. Their faces disappeared when he looked at them. Luke placed the sack outside their door. Then he carried a blanket to another house where an elderly woman coughed behind a hanging sheet. Evelyn followed him into the narrow lane. "You said you would not take charity. I said I would not take more than we needed. You need everything in that crate, not as much as they do." The barefoot girl passed them with the bucket. Water spilled over the rim and darkened the front of her dress. Evelyn removed 1 glove and touched the metal handle. It was cold enough to burn. Where is she taking this? To her mother. Why is she not wearing shoes? Luke looked at her. "Because shoes cost money." The answer held no accusation, which made it worse. Across the lane, a boy knelt beside the rail embankment, digging coal fragments from the snow. Another child stood watch for yard guards. A woman opened her door and accepted the food Luke had left. She nodded to him, then looked at Evelyn with guarded suspicion. No one asked who she was. No one asked for anything. They simply waited for the carriage to leave. Evelyn looked back at Luke's shack. From the outside, it appeared too thin to hold against the night. "How long have you lived here? 3 months. Where were you before? In a boarding room near the mine. Why did you leave? They did not allow infants." She turned toward him. "Where did Noah sleep while you worked with Mrs. Harper in the next shack?" "I gave her part of my wages." "And after you were dismissed," Luke glanced toward the ground. "I was dismissed this morning." The firewood choice had not been a problem he had faced for weeks. It had arrived that day. Evelyn watched him through the falling snow. "What happened at the mine?" "They cut 40 men. That is not what I asked." Luke's expression became unreadable. "The foreman said there was no work. And you believe him?" "I believe I no longer receive wages." He returned to the shack before she could question him again. Inside, Noah began crying. Luke poured water into the iron pot and placed it over the new fire. His movements were quick but controlled. He measured the milk carefully, wasting nothing. Evelyn stood beside the cradle. Noah opened his eyes. They were gray and clear, framed by lashes too dark for his pale face. He looked at her without fear. Evelyn had forgotten how directly babies looked at people. Adults concealed themselves. Children had not learned how. Noah lifted one hand. His fingers opened and closed. Evelyn did not touch him. Luke noticed. "You can pick him up. I might disturb him. He is already disturbed." There was the faintest trace of humor in Luke's voice. Evelyn removed her other glove. She slid one hand beneath Noah's head and the other beneath his body. She lifted him carefully, holding him too far from her chest. Luke adjusted her arm. Closer. She obeyed. Noah stared at the black buttons on her dress. Then he grabbed one. His grip was surprisingly strong. Evelyn inhaled. For an instant, the cold room vanished. She was back in another house holding another small body. Daniel's hair was damp with fever. His fingers had curled around the chain at her neck while he whispered that the room was too dark. Evelyn nearly returned Noah to the cradle. The child made a soft sound and pressed his cheek against her. She remained still. Luke brought the bottle from the stove. "May I?" Evelyn looked at the bottle. Luke placed it in her hand. Noah began drinking. His entire body relaxed. Evelyn watched his small jaw move. The sound was quiet and ordinary, yet tears gathered behind her eyes with such force that she had to look toward the window. Luke pretended not to notice. When Noah finished, Evelyn handed him back. Luke settled the baby against his shoulder. "You have done this alone for 8 months." Luke rubbed Noah's back. "Not well. He is alive. Some days that has been the full measure of success." Evelyn looked around the room again. A carpenter's square hung above the tool chest. Beside it lay several pieces of carefully cut pine. "You built the cradle." "Yes. It is better made than the shack." "That was the intention." Isaac appeared in the doorway. "The horses should be moving before the road freezes harder." Evelyn nodded, but she did not leave immediately. She looked at Luke. "There is a cottage on the northern edge of my estate." His face tightened. "It has a damaged roof, an old well, a stable, and an orchard that has not produced fruit in years. I need someone to restore the property and maintain the grounds. You already have employees. I have stable hands and a house staff. I do not have a carpenter who understands trees. You met me less than an hour ago. That is why you will inspect the work before accepting it." Luke adjusted Noah's blanket. "And if I refuse, then the food remains here and I leave. No debt. No debt." He searched her expression for a hidden condition. Why Evelyn looked at the photograph of Clara, then at Noah. "Because I have rooms, no one uses land, no one works in more firewood than my house could burn in 10 winters. That does not explain why you came inside." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "No," she pulled on her gloves. "It does not." The carriage ride back to Whitmore House passed in silence. Evelyn entered through the front door shortly after dark. The great hall glowed with lamplight. A fire burned beneath a marble mantel. Her housekeeper had placed fresh flowers on the central table, though winter flowers had no scent. Dinner waited in the dining room. A silver cover rested over roasted pheasant. Crystal glasses caught the light. 20 chairs stood around a table long enough to divide a family into strangers. Evelyn sat at one end. A servant removed the silver cover. Steam rose from the untouched meal. She saw Luke measuring milk into a bottle. She saw the barefoot girl carrying water. She heard Noah's weak cry. "I am not hungry," Evelyn said. The servant cleared the plate. Evelyn climbed the staircase alone. At the end of the upper corridor stood a narrow white door. She had not opened it in 19 years. The key remained on a chain beneath her dress. Her fingers shook as she placed it in the lock. The room smelled of dust, cedar, and thyme. A wooden train rested beneath the window. A child's coat hung behind the door. Books stood in uneven rows on a low shelf, exactly as Daniel had left them. Evelyn stepped inside. Her son's bed was covered by a blue quilt. On the nightstand stood a framed photograph of Daniel sitting beside his father, one shoe untied his smile, impatient and bright. Evelyn touched the frame. "You would have liked that baby," she whispered. Silence answered. She sat on the edge of the bed. For years she had believed preserving the room was an act of love. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been replaced. Even the pressed wildflower inside Daniel's favorite storybook remained between the same 2 pages. But the room no longer felt preserved. It felt arrested. Evelyn looked at the small coat. A thought entered her mind and frightened her. Was she helping Noah because he needed her, or because she needed him to become someone he could never be? She closed her eyes. "No child can replace you." Her voice broke on the final word. She let the grief rise without fighting it. It moved through her with the old force, but this time another image remained beside it. Luke turning his back to the wind so Noah would not feel the cold. Evelyn opened her eyes. Loving you does not require me to ignore him. She returned the photograph to the table and left the room unlocked. Downstairs, she rang for Isaac. He entered the study a few minutes later, still wearing his winter coat. I need the north cottage opened at first light. Isaac watched her carefully. The caretaker's cottage. Yes. The chimney has not been used in 5 years. Have it inspected. The roof may not survive a heavy snow. Bring carpenters. The well is frozen. Then clear it. Isaac's expression softened. And the man, bring him here tomorrow morning. With the child, Evelyn looked toward the dark windows. With the child. Luke arrived shortly before noon. He carried Noah beneath one arm and the unopened portion of Evelyn's food basket beneath the other. Snow covered his shoulders. He placed the basket on the porch before Evelyn could greet him. I kept what we used. She looked inside. He had returned coffee, sugar, dried fruit, 1 blanket, and 3 tins of milk. You returned milk for the 2nd time in 2 days. Noah has enough for the week, and after that I work. Evelyn studied him. You have not accepted the position. I came to see it. Isaac drove them across the estate in a smaller wagon. The northern ridge rose beyond the mansion, covered with pine and dormant grass. The caretaker's cottage stood near a neglected orchard. It was built from gray stone and dark timber. 1 shutter hung loose. Snow had gathered along the western roof. Luke walked around the structure before entering. He checked the foundation, pressed his hand against the chimney stones, and examined the roof beams from the attic. Evelyn followed him into the orchard. The trees were twisted and bare. 3 need to come down, she said. Luke scraped bark from 1 branch with his thumbnail. No, they have not produced fruit in 7 years. They were pruned badly. Can they recover if the roots are sound? He knelt and pressed his palm against the frozen earth. Evelyn watched him. The work includes repairing the cottage, maintaining the fences, clearing the well, caring for the orchard, and overseeing the northern grounds. You will receive weekly wages. The cottage is included. Milk for Noah will be provided until your 1st month is paid. Luke stood. I pay for the milk after that, if you wish. I do. You may inspect the records of every deduction. I intend to. Evelyn almost smiled. You will have 1 week to decide whether the arrangement is fair. If you leave, you owe me nothing. And if I fail, I dismiss you. Luke looked toward the cottage. Smoke rose from the chimney where Isaac's men had started a fire. Through the open door, Noah could be heard laughing at something Isaac was doing. The sound carried across the frozen yard. Luke's face softened. People will talk. They already do. They will say, I came here for your money. Do you intend to know? Then their accuracy appears limited. He looked at her for a long moment. You are my employer. Yes. I work for every dollar. Yes. I make decisions concerning my son. Of course. You do not bring gifts without asking. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. That may be difficult. It is a condition. She considered him, then extended her hand. Agreed. Luke removed his glove before taking it. His palm was rough and cold. Their handshake lasted only a moment. Inside the cottage, Noah laughed again. Luke released her hand and walked toward the sound. At the doorway, he stopped. Mrs. Whitmore. Yes, thank you for offering work. Evelyn looked past him at the fire burning in the stone hearth. Thank me when you have earned your first wage. That evening, smoke continued rising from the northern cottage long after darkness settled over the ridge. Evelyn stood at her bedroom window and watched the thin gray line disappear into the winter sky. Behind one small pane of glass, Luke crossed the room with Noah resting against his shoulder. The cottage had held fires before. It had never looked warm. Before dawn, Luke opened the cottage door, placed Noah's cradle near the hearth, and carried his tools into the frozen orchard. The sky above the northern ridge was still dark. A thin line of silver rested behind the mountains, barely enough light to separate the trees from the shadows between them. Luke stood among the neglected apple trees with a lantern in one hand and a pruning knife in the other. Their branches twisted toward the sky like stiff fingers. Old cuts had been made too close to the trunks. Several limbs were split beneath the weight of past winters. Moss covered the northern bark and dead grass crowded the roots. To Evelyn, the orchard had looked finished. To Luke, it looked wounded. There was a difference. He set down the lantern and pressed his thumb against the bark of the nearest tree. Beneath the gray surface, a narrow line of green remained. "Still here," he whispered. From the cottage came a small cry. Luke turned immediately. He crossed the yard, stamped the snow from his boots, and entered the warm room. Noah had kicked free of his blanket and was waving both arms above the cradle. "You waited until I touched the first tree." Noah stared at him. Luke lifted him and carried him to the window. Outside, the orchard slowly appeared beneath the morning light. "You see those trees?" Luke asked. "Everyone thinks they are dead." Noah placed one hand against the glass. Luke smiled faintly. "We will let them be wrong." He fed Noah, changed him, and tied the child securely against his chest beneath a wide wool sling. Then he returned to work. By sunrise, the first damaged branches lay in the snow. Luke did not cut quickly. He studied each tree before touching it, tracing the direction of its growth and measuring what could be removed without weakening what remained. When Noah grew restless, Luke spoke to him. He described the tools. He named the birds moving through the pines. He told him which clouds carried snow and which only carried wind. Noah understood none of it, but the sound of his father's voice kept him quiet. Shortly after 8, Isaac arrived in a wagon carrying fence posts, roofing nails, 2 coils of rope, and a small iron stove for heating water. Luke looked at the load. "I did not request a stove. Mrs. Whitmore did." "I already have a stove." Isaac stepped down from the wagon. "You have something shaped like a stove. It burns wood. It also smokes whenever the wind changes." Luke looked toward the cottage chimney. A gray thread of smoke escaped from a crack between 2 stones. "I can repair it." "With what?" Luke glanced at the wagon. Isaac nodded. "That is what I thought." Together they unloaded the supplies. When Luke reached for the iron stove, Isaac moved to take the heavier end. "I have it," Luke said. "So do I. I do not need help lifting it." Isaac kept his hands beneath the metal. "Then consider my end unnecessary." Luke looked at him. Isaac's expression remained calm. After a moment, Luke allowed him to carry half the weight. They moved the stove inside and set it near the wall. Noah watched from his cradle, chewing the corner of his blanket. Isaac crouched beside him. "You have better quarters now, young Mr. Bennett." Noah kicked both feet. Isaac lowered his voice. "Your father still looks as if someone plans to charge him for the air." Luke heard him from across the room. "I can hear you. I expected you could." Luke examined the new stove. "This was not part of the agreement. It belongs to the estate. And when I leave, it remains with the cottage." Luke ran one hand across the iron door. That answer satisfied him. He returned to the orchard. For the next 2 weeks he worked from darkness to darkness. He repaired the western fence where deer had been entering the property. He cleared frozen mud from the well and lowered himself into the stone shaft with a rope tied around his waist. He replaced cracked boards on the stable and reinforced the cottage shutters. At night, after Noah slept, Luke recorded everything he had used. 14 roofing nails, 6 feet of rope, 2 fence posts, 1 hinge, half a sack of lime. He kept the list in a small notebook and placed it inside his tool chest before sleeping. Evelyn received her first report at breakfast. Her estate manager laid the paper beside her coffee. "What is this Mr. Bennett's record of materials?" Evelyn read the page. Every nail had been counted. Every hour had been noted. At the bottom, Luke had written that 1 board had split during installation and should not be charged to the estate. Evelyn looked toward the northern windows. "Did you ask him to prepare this note? Has any groundskeeper done it before?" The manager almost laughed. "No." Evelyn folded the paper and placed it beneath her plate. The following afternoon, she walked to the cottage. She told herself she was inspecting the work. She did not bring a carriage because the snow had softened beneath the sun, and the path along the ridge was clear enough to walk. Luke was repairing a section of fence near the orchard. His coat hung from a post. His shirt sleeves were rolled above his elbows despite the cold. Each strike of the hammer landed cleanly. No wasted movement. No hesitation. Noah sat inside a wooden box lined with blankets several feet away. Luke had attached small wheels to its base and a rope to one side so he could move the child as he worked. Evelyn stopped beside it. Noah looked up. "You appear to have acquired a carriage." Luke glanced over his shoulder. His first one was too expensive. Evelyn touched the side of the box. The corners had been sanded smooth. A wooden bird was carved into the front panel. "You made this last night. He does not sleep as much as people claim babies do." Noah reached for Evelyn's glove. She gave him one finger. His hand closed around it. Luke returned to his work. Evelyn watched him fit a new rail into place. You have repaired more than the agreement required. The fence was failing farther east. The eastern fence was not assigned to you. Deer do not read agreements. She looked at him. A small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, then disappeared. Evelyn walked along the fence. The estate manager says you refused assistance at the well. I did not need 3 men watching me work. They were sent to help. They were sent because your manager believed I would fail. Did you know? Then perhaps you have proven him wrong. Luke set down the hammer. I am not here to prove anything to him. Who are you proving it to? He looked toward Noah. Evelyn followed his gaze. Luke picked up the next rail. I am working Mrs. Whitmore. She heard the boundary in his voice. She left him to it. The next Friday, the estate manager delivered Luke's wages in a sealed envelope. Luke counted the money at the cottage table. Then he counted it again. He wrapped Noah in a blanket and walked to the mansion through falling snow. Evelyn was in the library reviewing property accounts when the housekeeper announced him. Luke entered with Noah against his shoulder. He placed $2 silver on Evelyn's desk. You paid me too much. Evelyn looked at the coins. Are you certain I know the agreement? It may have included a winter allowance. It did not. She opened the account book and checked the amount. You are right. Luke waited for her to take the money. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. No one would have known. I would have. You walked nearly a mile through snow to return $2. They were not mine. Noah began pulling at Luke's collar. Evelyn looked from the child to the coins. Most men I have known spend a great deal of effort explaining why something should belong to them. Most men you know have more than they need. That has never stopped them. Luke slid the coins closer. Evelyn picked them up. Thank you. He nodded and turned to leave. Mr. Bennett. Luke stopped. The orchard report says you refused to remove the 3 western trees. They should stay. They have not produced fruit since before my husband died. They were cut too heavily. Water sprouts took the strength from the main branches. I was told the roots were failing. Who told you? The previous groundskeeper. Luke's expression suggested that explained everything. Evelyn stood. Show me. They walked to the orchard together. The wind had quieted, leaving the ridge beneath a pale winter sun. Snow rested in the forks of the branches. Luke knelt beside the first tree and brushed snow away from the trunk. He pointed to a thin ridge in the bark. This is an old injury. It healed. He scraped the surface gently with his knife. Green appeared beneath the gray. The tree is alive. Being alive is not the same as being useful. Luke looked up at her. No, his eyes remained on hers. But people confuse the two when they become impatient. Evelyn felt the words settle between them. Luke stood and touched one of the damaged branches. These trees need time, better pruning, clean soil around the roots. If they do not flower in spring, I will remove them myself. You are arguing with the person who pays your wages. I am protecting the property of the person who pays my wages. Evelyn looked at the twisted branches. You have until spring. That is enough. He walked toward the next tree. Evelyn remained beside the trunk, her hand resting against the scarred bark. After that, her visits became more frequent. She always arrived with a reason. One afternoon, she brought records showing where the orchard had once been irrigated. Another day, she delivered a book about grafting apple trees, though Luke admitted he read slowly and disliked authors who used 6 words when one would do. She inspected the chimney twice in the same week. Luke noticed. You checked that yesterday. The wind changed. The chimney did not. Evelyn looked up at the stones. I prefer certainty. Luke wiped mortar from his hands. No one comes to a cottage 3 times in 7 days because of a chimney. She turned toward him. Are you asking why I am here? I am saying the chimney is sound. Noah began crying inside. Luke set down his tools. Evelyn reached the cradle before he did. She stopped with both hands above the child, uncertain. Luke leaned against the doorway. You can lift him. He may want you. He usually does. That is not encouraging. He also wants the spoon whenever I feed him. His judgment is not complete. Evelyn looked back at Noah. His face had reddened. Tears collected near his ears. She slid one hand beneath his head and lifted him. He cried harder. Luke folded his arms. You appear calm. I have negotiated mining contracts with armed men. They probably slept more. Evelyn held Noah closer. He grabbed the chain at her neck. She removed it before he could pull. The chain held a small oval locket. Luke saw the photograph inside before she closed it. A young boy smiled from behind the glass. Evelyn tucked the locket into her glove. Noah continued crying. Luke stepped closer. Support his back. I am supporting his back. Not like a chair, like this. He placed one hand over hers and adjusted her arm. Noah settled against her chest. His crying softened. Evelyn became very still. Luke withdrew his hand. The room changed. Neither of them spoke. Noah turned his face toward the sound of Evelyn's heartbeat and closed his eyes. Luke looked away first. I should finish the shutter. He returned outside. Evelyn remained near the fire with Noah sleeping against her. She studied the small curve of his ear, the soft hair at the back of his head, the faint movement of his fingers against her dress. Memories came without permission. Daniel running through the mansion with mud on his shoes. Daniel refusing to eat carrots. Daniel asleep beneath the dining table while guests searched the house. Daniel burning with fever, asking her to open a window because he could not breathe. Evelyn closed her eyes. Noah shifted. She almost called Luke. Instead, she began humming. The melody had no words. It was the song she had once sung beside Daniel's bed. Outside the window, Luke stopped hammering. He stood motionless in the snow, listening. When Evelyn left that afternoon, Luke found Noah still asleep and the fire carefully fed. A week later, Evelyn noticed Clara's photograph on the cottage wall. Luke had moved it into a simple wooden frame. Clara stood beside a river with one hand holding down her hat. Her smile was broad and fearless. She was beautiful, Evelyn said. Luke added a piece of wood to the stove. She was loud. Evelyn looked at him. Luke sat in the chair across from her. She laughed before she finished telling a joke. She sang while she kneaded bread. She argued with thunder. Did she win usually? A smile crossed his face. It remained for only a moment. Then the room became quiet. Luke looked at the photograph. The camp was never silent when Clara was alive. After she died, I could hear every board in the walls. Evelyn understood. My son hated silence. Luke looked at her. She had never spoken Daniel's name to him. He used to hide wooden soldiers beneath the dining table, she said. During formal dinners, he would crawl between the guests and move them from chair to chair. Luke leaned back. Did anyone see him? Everyone saw him. No one wanted to be the first to tell my husband. Luke smiled again. How old was he? 6. The smile disappeared. Evelyn looked toward the fire. He had scarlet fever. The physician stayed for 3 nights. We brought another doctor from Butte. My husband offered him more money than most families earn in a lifetime. Her fingers tightened around the fabric of her skirt. Daniel died before sunrise. Luke did not tell her that the boy was in a better place. He did not say time healed anything. He sat beside her, leaving enough distance between them that she did not feel trapped. That is too young, he said. Evelyn swallowed. Yes. Noah slept in the cradle near them. The cottage settled around the fire. Luke looked at Clara's photograph. Evelyn looked at the locket in her hand. For the first time, neither of them appeared alone in their grief. Outside the estate, people had begun to notice Evelyn's visits. At the Helena Ladies' Society luncheon, Margaret Hale poured tea into a porcelain cup and asked whether Evelyn's new employee was proving grateful. He works, Evelyn said. Margaret smiled. That is not what I asked. It is the only answer you require. The other women pretended not to listen. Margaret lowered her voice. You must understand how this appears. A young widower living alone on your property, you visiting without a companion. I am 44 years old, Margaret. I no longer require a chaperone to inspect my own fences. This is not about fences. Evelyn placed her cup on the saucer. What is it about? Margaret glanced toward the women nearby. A man in his position may begin to mistake kindness for opportunity. Evelyn looked around the table. Every woman there had known Daniel. Several had attended his funeral. Not one had asked why she had begun visiting the Northern Ridge. They had only asked what Luke might take from her. A hungry child entered Bell's mercantile, Evelyn said. Every respectable person in that room looked away. Margaret's expression tightened. I was not there, no, but you are here now and you are still looking in the wrong direction. Evelyn stood and left before dessert. The rumors reached Luke through a lumber supplier. The man arrived at the cottage with a wagon of cedar boards and a smile that remained too long. So this is where Mrs. Whitmore keeps you. Luke checked the boards. She ordered 12. She paid for 12. Luke looked up. The supplier leaned against the wagon. Fine arrangement, warm cottage, steady pay, rich widow walking up the hill every afternoon. Luke's face became still. Unload the lumber. The man laughed. I meant no offense. You succeeded without meaning to. The supplier stepped closer. A man in your position should be careful. People may think you are working toward a larger inheritance. Luke caught his wrist before the man touched his shoulder. The supplier's smile vanished. For one moment, Luke looked ready to break the bone beneath his hand. Then Noah cried from inside the cottage. Luke released the man. Unload the lumber and leave. That evening, Luke packed his clothes into the old canvas bag he had brought from the labor camp. Evelyn found him folding Noah's blankets. What are you doing leaving? Why? Because they are not punishing me. He placed the milk tins inside a crate. They are punishing you. I decide what harms me. You decide what you admit harms you. Evelyn stepped into the room. Luke continued packing. I have lived through gossip before. This is different. Why he stopped. The question stood between them. Luke looked toward Noah, because some of it is no longer entirely false. Evelyn's breath caught. Luke turned away. I will not become another price you pretend not to feel, and I will not allow strangers to make my decisions because they speak loudly. I am not asking you to obey them. You are packing because of them. I am packing because I know what men say about women who cross the lines drawn for them, and I know what those lines are worth. Luke lifted the bag. Evelyn blocked the doorway. You are not leaving because you want to protect me. His eyes narrowed. You are leaving because losing a home hurts less when you choose the hour. The words struck him. For several seconds only the fire moved. Luke slowly lowered the bag. I buried one home outside Granite. His voice was rough. I watched men carry Clara into the ground. Then I carried Noah into a room where every sound reminded me she was missing. Do not tell me I am afraid of losing a house. I am not speaking about the cottage. Luke looked at her. Evelyn's eyes had softened. Neither moved closer. Noah shifted in the cradle and opened his eyes. Luke sat beside him. I do not know what this is, he said. Evelyn looked toward the window. Neither do I. She walked to the door, then stopped. We do not have to name it before it is ready. Luke looked down at Noah. When he raised his eyes again, Evelyn had gone. For 3 days she did not return. Luke worked longer hours. He repaired fences that did not require repair. He split enough wood for half the winter. He cleaned the stable twice. Whenever carriage wheels sounded on the road, Noah turned toward the window. Luke pretended not to notice. At Whitmore House, Evelyn sat alone in Daniel's room holding the small cedar heart Luke had carved for her. He had given it to her beside the western apple trees after she helped hold a damaged branch while he bound it. Clara believed cedar kept its scent after everything else faded, he had said. Why are you giving it to me? Because you saw something worth saving before I did. Now the wood rested warm inside her palm. She feared that Noah was becoming Daniel's shadow. She feared Luke might mistake gratitude for love. She feared that she had opened a locked room inside herself and would not survive closing it again. On the 4th evening, she walked to the orchard. Luke was standing beside the gate. He had seen her coming from the ridge. I thought you had finished inspecting the trees, he said. I was not avoiding the trees. Luke nodded slowly. I do not know what this is either. Evelyn looked toward the cottage where firelight glowed behind the glass. Then we will not name it before it is ready. Luke opened the gate. She stepped through. Down on the road, beyond the last line of pines, a black carriage stood in the falling snow. Then he tapped the roof with his cane and the carriage rolled back toward Helena. Randall Crowe watched Evelyn enter Luke's cottage, then tapped the roof of his carriage with his cane and disappeared into the falling snow. By noon the next day, his carriage stood before Whitmore House. Randall did not come alone. 2 members of the Helena Council followed him through the front doors, brushing snow from their shoulders, while Isaac watched from the hall. Randall removed his gloves one finger at a time and handed them to no one. He had known Evelyn's late husband for more than 20 years. He had also spent most of those years trying to purchase, weaken, or outlast every piece of land attached to the Whitmore name. Evelyn received the men in the library. She remained standing. Randall smiled as though they had arrived for tea. "Mrs. Whitmore, I hope we are not disturbing you. You came without invitation." "Then I will be brief. That would be a first." One of the councilmen lowered his eyes. The other pretended to study the bookshelves. Randall walked toward the fire. "I have heard concerns regarding the man living on your northern property." Evelyn folded her hands in front of her. "From whom? People who value the stability of the city." "Names." Randall turned. "You know how these matters travel. Gossip travels. Evidence has a destination." His smile thinned. Luke Bennett was not dismissed simply because the Empire Mine reduced its workforce. Evelyn said nothing. "He spoke at a miners' gathering several weeks ago. He accused the company of negligence. He encouraged laborers to question their foreman and refused to withdraw his statements when management offered him the opportunity. Was he accused of a crime? No. Was he arrested? No. Then he expressed an opinion. He inflamed men who already believed themselves mistreated. Were they—" Randall glanced toward the councilman. "The Empire Mine employs hundreds of men. Accidents happen in dangerous work." "What accident?" The room became quiet. Randall looked at her more carefully. "You have not heard?" "No. A support frame failed in the western shaft. 3 miners were killed." Evelyn felt something tighten inside her. "When?" "6 weeks ago. And Mr. Bennett believed the mine was responsible." "Mr. Bennett is a carpenter. He is not an engineer. That does not answer me." Randall walked toward the window. The structure failed during a difficult section of excavation. The timber may have been weakened. The men may have ignored instructions. There are several possibilities. Did Luke build the frame? He inspected part of it. Did he report a problem? Randall's silence answered before he did. He complained about the width of several beams. To whom? The foreman. And the foreman ignored him. The foreman made a judgment. 3 men died. Randall turned from the window. 3 men died in a mine. Helena was built upon such risks. Evelyn stared at him. Helena was built upon men. The mine is only where some of them were buried. The councilman shifted uneasily. Randall moved away from the window. "You have always had your husband's talent for turning business into sentiment. My husband knew the difference between profit and theft." A flush rose along Randall's collar. He placed his cane against the side of a chair. "The mine is not the only reason we came." Evelyn waited. Randall drew a folded document from his coat. "The northern ridge of your estate was acquired under an early territorial survey. The western boundary has never been formally reconciled with the Crow parcel. My attorney reviewed that boundary after my husband died. Your attorney reviewed the county record. I have located an earlier field survey." He placed the paper on her desk. "The document suggests that part of the caretaker's cottage and most of the orchard may rest outside the Whitmore line." Evelyn did not touch it. "You have known about this for years. I discovered it recently. You discovered it after Luke Bennett moved onto the land." Randall smiled again. "I discovered it after the land became relevant." "Relevant to whom?" "To the city." "Try again." His eyes hardened. "There are indications of a silver vein beneath the ridge." The truth settled between them. This was not about Luke's speech. It was not about Evelyn's reputation. Randall wanted the land. "If you challenge the boundary," Evelyn said, "the court will ask why you waited until now." "I am prepared to answer. And while the case is examined, I may request that the court freeze leases, improvements, and sales connected to the disputed parcel." One of the councilmen cleared his throat. Randall continued. "That would include any employment agreement tied to residence on the property. You want me to dismiss Luke? I want you to avoid unnecessary embarrassment." Evelyn stepped closer to the desk. "You entered my home with 2 public officials to threaten a carpenter and his infant son. I came to prevent a mistake." "No. You came because you are frightened of a man who remembers what happened underground." Randall picked up his gloves. "Send him away. The survey matter may disappear. Then you have just admitted that the survey is not the matter." The 2 councilmen looked at Randall. For the first time he seemed aware that he had brought witnesses. His jaw tightened. "You are risking more than 1 cottage. I know exactly what I am risking." "Do you?" Randall looked around the library. The carved shelves, the marble fireplace, and the tall windows reflected generations of Whitmore money. Your husband built something respected. Do not let loneliness persuade you to tear it down for a man who has nothing." Evelyn crossed the distance between them. "Leave my house." Randall picked up his cane. At the door, he stopped. "When the banks hear that you are sheltering a labor agitator on disputed land, they may become cautious. Then they should examine their courage before examining my accounts." He gave her a shallow bow. The men left. Evelyn remained in the library until the sound of the carriage disappeared. Then she unfolded the survey. The paper was old, but the ink marking the northern boundary was darker than the rest. Someone had added that line years after the original map was drawn. She rang for Isaac. "Send for my attorney." Isaac looked at the document. "Is there trouble?" "Yes." "Does Mr. Bennett know?" "Not yet." By late afternoon, Evelyn was walking toward the cottage. The snow had stopped, but a hard wind moved through the orchard. Luke stood on a ladder repairing the edge of the roof. He saw her face and climbed down without asking why she had come. "What happened?" Evelyn held out the survey. "Randall Crowe visited this morning." Luke did not take the paper. "What did he want you gone?" Luke looked toward the cottage window. Noah was asleep inside. "Why, he says you spoke at a miners' meeting." Luke turned away. Evelyn waited. At last he took the survey and read it. "He owns part of the Empire mine," Luke said. "I know. He also chose the timber supplier." Evelyn studied him. "Tell me what happened." Luke folded the document slowly. The western shaft had been sinking for months. The ground was soft and the supports were taking more weight than they were built to hold. "You reported it. Twice. To the foreman and the superintendent." "What did they say?" "They said replacing the timber would stop production for 3 days." The wind moved through the bare branches. Luke looked toward the mountains. The company had purchased a cheaper grade of pine, narrow beams, too many knots. I told them one section needed to be rebuilt before another cart passed beneath it, but it was not rebuilt. "No." His voice became quieter. "I was working above ground when it failed." Evelyn could hear the memory in the spaces between his words. "Who died Ben Foster?" "Walter Pike. A boy named Samuel Reed." "How old was he? 17? Luke rubbed one hand across his face. His mother came to the gate because they would not let families near the shaft. She stood there for 6 hours before anyone told her which body was his. Evelyn looked at the cottage. "Is that why you spoke at the meeting?" "Yes." "What did you say the truth? Which part, all of it?" Luke handed the survey back. "They offered me my position if I withdrew the statement. You refused." I had already watched 3 men buried for the sake of 3 days' production. Evelyn looked at his hands. "Do you have proof?" Luke walked to the tool chest inside the cottage. He lifted a false wooden panel beneath the bottom drawer and removed several folded sheets. "I copied the inspection notes before the mine took my ledger." Evelyn examined them. The measurements were precise. Dates and locations had been recorded beside sketches of the supports. "You kept these while living in the rail camp." "I kept them because the dead men could not." Noah stirred in the cradle. Luke crossed the room and adjusted the blanket. Evelyn placed the notes on the table. "Randall intends to challenge the northern boundary. He may freeze the lease and improvements." Luke stopped moving. "What lease the cottage is part of your employment arrangement?" "No written lease exists, not yet." Luke looked at her. "Do not make one." "Why?" "Because it gives him another reason to attack you." "He does not require a reason. He requires an opening." Luke began gathering Noah's clothes from a shelf. Evelyn watched him. "What are you doing leaving again?" "This is not gossip, no, this is extortion. And he will use every bank supplier and councilman he owns." Luke placed the clothes inside his canvas bag. "If I am gone, his excuse disappears. His desire for the land remains. He may have desired it for years, but he moved when I arrived." Evelyn stepped between him and the door. "He moved because you know what happened in his mine. Then I will take the notes to another town and live where I will find work. With Noah in winter I found work before. You found a shack with 2 pieces of firewood." Luke's face tightened. "I survived. So did he barely. That is enough." "No, Luke." The firmness in her voice stopped him. "It is not enough." He looked at her with anger that was not entirely directed at her. "You do not get to decide what is enough for us. I decide what happens on my land, and Randall decides whether it remains your land. Only if I allow him." Luke lifted the bag. I will not let my son's shelter become the match that burns down your life." Evelyn took the bag from his hand and set it on the table. "You are not leaving to protect me." His eyes narrowed. "You are leaving because losing a home hurts less when you choose the hour." The words struck the same wound they had touched before, but this time Luke did not look away. "I buried one person because I could not save her." His voice broke around the edges. "I carried Clara into a wagon while Noah cried in the room behind me. I stood beside the grave and promised her I would keep him alive. Every decision since then has been measured against that promise." Evelyn's anger softened. "And I buried a child while every doctor in Montana stood inside my house." Luke's breathing slowed. "My money could not save Daniel. Your strength could not save Clara. We have both spent years believing that failure gave us control over the next loss." Luke looked toward Noah. Evelyn continued. "If you leave tonight, Randall wins before he proves a single word. He can destroy your standing. My standing is built from invitations, whispers, and people who never entered that labor camp. Your money. My money has purchased walls. It has not made this house less empty." Luke lowered his eyes. "You may regret saying that. I regret many things. Helping you is not among them." Noah woke and began making small sounds from the cradle. Luke lifted him. The child rested his head beneath Luke's chin. Evelyn picked up the inspection notes. "We fight with this." Luke studied her. "You intend to use them? Yes. They may close the mine. They may force it to stop killing men. And the boundary, my attorney will examine the survey." Luke looked at the old map. "Randall will not remain quiet. Neither will we." The following week changed the rhythm of Whitmore House. Evelyn's attorney arrived each morning with county records, deeds, and territorial maps. Isaac made repeated trips to the clerk's office. Luke spent evenings at the mansion explaining the mine notes and identifying the signatures of inspectors and foremen. They discovered that Randall's field survey had been copied from an older map, but the boundary line had been altered. The ink was newer. The witness named at the bottom had died 2 years before the map was supposedly certified. They also found that Randall's company had purchased mineral rights along the western edge of the Whitmore estate 6 months earlier. The northern ridge stood between those rights and the nearest known silver deposit. The pieces fit too neatly to ignore. Evelyn's attorney warned her that proof of fraud would require testimony. From whom, she asked. A surveyor, a clerk, someone who saw the change made, and the mine. The notes are strong, but the company will say Mr. Bennett fabricated them after his dismissal. Luke sat near the window. They will. Do other workers know you reported the timber? Yes. Will they speak? Luke thought of men with wives, debts, and children, not while Randall controls their wages. Evelyn closed the file. Then we give them somewhere else to stand. 2 days later, invitations went out for a public meeting in front of the county courthouse. The Helena Ladies' Society received one. So did the council. So did mine workers, rail families, merchants, and newspaper editors. Randall sent no reply. The pressure began before the meeting took place. A lumber supplier canceled the order for the school building Evelyn had quietly begun planning near the labor camp. A bank delayed renewal of an estate credit line. 3 merchants refused to extend ordinary business terms. At a winter charity banquet, Evelyn found her place card removed from the main table and set near the service entrance. Margaret Hale approached before dinner. You can still end this. Evelyn looked at the distant table where Randall sat with 2 bankers. End what? The attention. Dismiss Mr. Bennett. Withdraw the meeting. And the dead miners. Margaret lowered her voice. You cannot repair every injustice in Montana. No, but I can refuse to finance one. People are saying he has become more than an employee. Evelyn looked at her. Would that make his evidence less true? It would make your judgment questionable. Evelyn lifted her place card. My judgment has been questioned since the day my husband died and left property in my name. She placed the card on an empty tray. You are not concerned about my judgment. You are concerned that I may use it without permission. She left before the first course. Outside servants were carrying untouched food toward the kitchen. Evelyn asked that her place setting be packed into baskets. She took the baskets to the rail camp. She did not announce her arrival. She placed them on Mrs. Harper's table and helped divide the bread meat and apples among the families. A boy who had once watched her carriage from the mud handed her an empty basket when they finished. "Will there be more?" he asked. Evelyn looked at the bare table. Yes, she did not know how yet. On the morning of the public meeting, snow clouds hung low over Helena. A crowd gathered before the courthouse. Miners stood with their caps in their hands. Merchants remained near the steps. Women from the social clubs watched from beneath umbrellas. Randall stood in the front row beside his attorney. Luke remained near the edge of the crowd with Noah in his arms. He had asked Evelyn not to include him in any announcement she had not discussed with him. She had agreed to discuss the work. She had not promised to discuss every decision. Evelyn climbed the courthouse steps. The crowd quieted. "I have called this meeting because private threats have been made against my property, my employees, and the truth surrounding the deaths of 3 men at the Empire Mine." Randall stepped forward. "This is not a courtroom." "No," Evelyn said. "That is why you cannot hide behind procedure." A murmur passed through the crowd. Evelyn held up Luke's copied inspection notes. These records show that defective support timber was reported before the western shaft collapsed. Randall's attorney called the documents unverified. Evelyn turned toward the miners. "Anyone who witnessed Mr. Bennett report those beams may provide a statement to my attorney. Any man dismissed for doing so will receive temporary paid work on the school and nursery. I am establishing for the children of miners and railroad laborers." The crowd stirred. Randall's face changed. "You are buying testimony. I am removing the price of telling the truth." She placed the notes on the courthouse railing. "Part of my silver income will fund the school. It will include 2 classrooms, a heated nursery, and evening lessons for working adults." A woman in the crowd covered her mouth. Luke stared at Evelyn. She continued, "The North Ridge cottage and orchard will be placed under a recorded 5-year work agreement with Luke Bennett. If he completes the restoration terms, he will hold the legal right to purchase the homestead for $1. Luke stepped forward. "Evelyn," she looked at him, "you did not tell me. You would have refused. It is too much. Then earn it slowly." The crowd became silent. Randall climbed the first courthouse step. "You cannot transfer disputed land. I have not transferred it. You are attempting to place a labor agitator between my lawful claim and the court. I am placing a lawful employee inside a lawful agreement." Randall pointed toward Luke. "That man has manipulated a grieving woman." Luke moved forward, but Evelyn raised one hand. She faced Randall. "You believe grief makes a woman foolish because you have never understood what surviving it requires." Randall's voice rose. "Those silver shares belong to the Whitmore name. They belong to me. Your husband built that fortune, and I have spent 10 years preventing men like you from taking it." A sound moved through the crowd, half shock and half approval. Evelyn stepped down from the courthouse platform. Randall remained above her, suddenly looking smaller. "If you challenge the agreement," she said, "you may explain in open court why a carpenter and an infant threaten you more than 3 dead miners do." She walked toward Luke. Noah reached for her as she approached. Luke's face held anger, fear, and something close to admiration. "This changes everything," he said. "No." Evelyn touched Noah's hand. "It makes everything visible. The cost arrived before sunset. The bank suspended credit for the school. The lumber supplier refused delivery to the Northern Ridge. 2 tenants received letters warning that their leases might become entangled in litigation. An anonymous note appeared beneath Evelyn's front door. Send the miner away before he takes the rest. That night, a brick broke the cottage window. Luke reached Noah before the glass finished falling. The child screamed. Luke covered him with his body as fragments struck the floor and blanket. Evelyn arrived minutes later with Isaac. Luke stood beside the broken window holding the brick. A strip of paper had been tied around it. He handed it to her. "This is what standing beside me costs." Evelyn read the words, then looked at the glass caught in Noah's blanket. "No," she said. She untied the paper and placed the brick on the table. "This is what fear costs the people who surrender to it." The next morning Isaac arrived with boards for the window. Behind his wagon came 3 miners carrying tools. Then Mrs. Harper appeared with a pot of stew. A retired teacher brought a box of books. Near noon, Amos Bell drove up with Nail's lamp oil and 2 tins of milk. Luke looked at the supplies. "I did not order these." Amos avoided his eyes. They were entered incorrectly. All of them. "My clerk has poor handwriting. You do not have a clerk. Amos set the crate on the ground. Then the error is mine. He returned to his wagon before Luke could answer. By evening, the broken window had been repaired. Men who had refused to speak at the mine stood beneath the orchard trees and signed statements one by one. Their names filled 3 pages. Luke watched Evelyn collect them. For the first time since leaving the Empire mine, he was not the only man carrying the truth. Above them, dark clouds gathered over the mountains. Luke climbed onto the cottage roof to inspect the western beams. The canceled lumber order had forced him to use salvaged timber. He drove one final nail into an old support. The wood split beneath the hammer. Evelyn stood below with her coat pulled tightly around her. Will it hold? Luke studied the crack as wind moved across the ridge. For ordinary snow, he said, the first heavy flakes began falling through the orchard. Luke remained on the roof for several seconds, staring at the crack that had opened beneath his hammer. It ran along the grain of the old support beam, thin as a strand of dark thread. Under ordinary weather, the timber might have lasted until spring. Under deep snow, every inch of that crack would carry weight it had never been meant to bear. Evelyn stood below with one hand raised against the wind. "Come down," she called. Luke tested the beam with the heel of his palm. The wood answered with a low groan. He climbed from the roof and landed in the snow beside the ladder. "We need to move Noah to the mansion." Evelyn looked toward the cottage window. Firelight glowed behind the repaired glass. "For the night until the storm passes." Luke gathered the tools while Evelyn folded the ladder. The snow thickened quickly. By the time they reached the cottage door, the footprints behind them had already begun to disappear. Inside, Noah sat on the floor beside the hearth, striking a wooden spoon against an overturned bowl. He looked up and smiled when Evelyn entered. Luke removed his coat. "The roof may not hold." Evelyn went directly to the cradle and began folding Noah's blankets. "Then we leave now." Luke looked toward the western window. The orchard had vanished behind a wall of white. "We may already be too late." The wind struck the cottage hard enough to shake the door in its frame. Noah stopped playing. Another gust followed, stronger than the first. Snow hissed against the window glass. Evelyn lifted Noah. "Isaac can bring the wagon. No wagon will stay upright on the ridge in this wind." "Then we walk." Luke crossed to the door and opened it only a few inches. The storm forced it back against his shoulder. Snow poured across the floor. He pushed the door closed and drove the wooden bar into place. "We stay until the wind drops." Evelyn looked at the ceiling. A faint dusting of plaster had fallen near the western wall. Luke followed her eyes. "The root cellar is beneath the kitchen. If the roof begins to fail, we take Noah there. What about us? The cellar is too small for all 3. Evelyn tightened her hold on the child. "Then we make room." Luke added wood to the stove. The cottage darkened as the snow covered the windows. It was not yet evening, but the light outside had turned gray and dim. Evelyn placed Noah in the cradle and helped Luke move the table beneath the weakest section of the roof. They wedged a timber post between the tabletop and the ceiling beam. The floor creaked under the pressure. Luke stepped back. "It may slow the collapse. You do not sound convinced." "I am not." The wind howled around the stone walls. Noah began crying. Evelyn lifted him again and walked beside the hearth. She hummed the same quiet melody Luke had once heard through the window. The child's crying softened, but he did not sleep. Luke watched them. "You should be at the mansion, so should you. This is my home." Evelyn looked around the small room. "It stopped being only yours some time ago." Luke's face changed, but before he could answer, a sharp crack split the air above them. The table jumped. A shower of dust and wood fragments fell from the ceiling. Luke crossed the room in 2 steps. "Cellar, now." He pulled the rug away from the kitchen floor and lifted a square wooden hatch. Cold air rose from the darkness below. The cellar was little more than a stone-lined chamber used long ago for potatoes and preserves. Straw covered the ground. Shelves leaned against one wall. The space beneath the earth was cramped, but the wind could not reach it directly. Luke lowered a lantern through the opening. "I will bring blankets." Evelyn started down the ladder with Noah against her chest. The cottage shook again. A roof board tore loose and vanished into the storm. Luke grabbed the milk tins, the wool blankets, and the wooden crate that had once carried the supplies from Bell's mercantile. He placed the crate in the cellar and lined it with straw. "What are you doing?" Evelyn asked, keeping him off the ground. Water had begun seeping between the stones where melted snow found its way beneath the cottage. Luke set the dented milk tin under one corner of the crate to raise it above the wet floor. Evelyn wrapped Noah in the thickest blanket and laid him inside. The child reached for her. She gave him her hand. "Stay with him," Luke said. Evelyn looked up. "Where are you going to brace the hatch? You cannot hold the roof by yourself. I only need to keep the opening clear." Another violent crack sounded overhead. Luke climbed the ladder. Evelyn followed him halfway. "Luke." He looked down at her. "Do not close this door. I will not. Promise me. I promise." He returned to the cottage. The room had changed in the few moments they had been below. Snow blew through a widening gap near the western roof. The fire flickered as wind entered the chimney. Luke pulled the table away from the wall and shoved it across the cellar hatch, leaving enough space for air and movement. He dragged a second timber post from beside the stove and set it beneath the central beam. The roof groaned. He pushed upward with both hands. For one breath, the cottage became still. Then the western beam snapped. The sound was deep and final. Luke turned toward the cellar. The ceiling came down. Timber shingles and snow crashed into the room. The table splintered beneath the weight. A heavy oak beam struck the floor across the cellar opening. Luke was thrown against the stone hearth. The lantern went dark. For several seconds he could hear nothing but the storm. Then Noah cried from below. Luke forced himself upright. Pain burned through his left shoulder. Blood ran from a cut near his hairline and into one eye. "Evelyn!" "I am here." Her voice came from beneath the beam. "Noah! He is crying! He is alive!" Luke crawled toward the blocked opening. Snow poured through the ruined roof, filling the cottage faster than he could clear it. He wrapped both hands around the oak beam and lifted. It did not move. He planted his feet and pulled again. Pain tore through his shoulder. The beam rose less than an inch before falling back into place. "Luke," Evelyn called. "Stop! I can move it. You cannot." He ignored her. He found the iron pry bar beneath the fallen boards and forced one end under the timber. The floor cracked as he pressed his full weight against it. The beam shifted slightly. Not enough. Noah's cries grew louder. Luke pushed harder. The pry bar slipped and struck his ribs. He fell onto one knee. "Listen to me," Evelyn said. Luke pressed his face close to the narrow opening. "I am getting you out. Noah is protected. The cellar wall is holding. The roof is still falling. Then find help." Luke froze. "No. You cannot lift the beam alone. I will not leave you beneath this house. If you stay, all three of us freeze." Another section of roof collapsed behind him. Snow buried the stove. The fire went out. Luke looked through the narrow gap. He could see only a small portion of Evelyn's face in the lantern light below. She held Noah against her chest. "Go to the mansion," she said. "Bring Isaac. The storm will kill me before I reach it. Then do not let it." Luke closed his eyes. He thought of Clara, lying pale beneath a mining camp blanket. He thought of carrying Noah away from her grave. Every part of him resisted the thought of walking away from his child. Noah cried again. Luke placed his hand through the gap. Evelyn reached up and held it. "I will keep him warm," she said. Luke pressed his forehead against the beam. "I am coming back, I know." He stood. The front door had disappeared beneath fallen boards. Luke climbed through the broken western wall and stepped into the storm. The wind knocked him down immediately. Snow filled his mouth and eyes. He crawled until he reached the lee side of the stone chimney, then forced himself upright. The mansion was less than a mile away. It might as well have been across the mountains. Luke wrapped a strip of cloth around his bleeding head and began walking. There was no road. The snow reached above his knees. Each step required him to lift his legs through heavy drifts while the wind pushed him sideways. He could not see the orchard. He found the first tree by striking it with his shoulder. From there he moved by memory. 12 steps east. Turn toward the lower ridge. Keep the wind against the right side of his face. The cold entered his boots. His fingers became stiff. He fell near the fence and could not rise at first. Noah's cry seemed to follow him through the storm. Luke pulled himself up using a fence rail. "I am coming back," he said into the wind. He crossed the final field on his hands and knees. At Whitmore House, Evelyn's absence had already alarmed Isaac. He stood in the great hall watching the northern windows while servants carried firewood into the lower rooms. The storm had buried the main drive. 2 stable hands were securing the horses beneath blankets. Isaac was reaching for his coat when pounding sounded at the service door. It was not the knock of a visitor. It was the strike of a body running out of strength. Isaac opened the door. Luke fell across the threshold. His coat was covered in ice. Blood had frozen along one side of his face. His lips were blue. Isaac pulled him inside. "Where is Mrs. Whitmore?" Luke tried to speak, but his teeth struck together. "The cottage." Isaac knelt beside him. "Where is Noah Seller?" Luke dragged air into his lungs. Roof came down. Beam across the hatch. Isaac called for blankets and men. Luke pushed himself upright. "There is no time. You cannot walk back." Luke reached for the wall. "I am going." Isaac caught his arm. "You will die before you reach the gate." Luke looked at him. "My son is under that roof." A voice came from the corridor behind them. "And so is Evelyn." Isaac turned. 2 stable hands stood ready with rope shovels and heavy coats. Isaac took his own coat from the hook. "We go together." The 4 men tied themselves along a rope and stepped into the storm. Luke led them toward the ridge. He tried to follow the path he had made, but the snow had erased every mark. The wind had shifted. Nothing looked familiar. He stopped. Isaac pulled closer. Which way Luke turned his face toward the storm. He could not see the trees. Then he heard a sound beneath the wind, a loose shutter striking stone. The cottage. Luke pointed left. They moved toward it. At the cellar, Evelyn held Noah beneath her coat. The lantern flame had weakened to a small blue edge. Snow filtered through cracks above them. Every few minutes, another piece of the cottage settled under the weight. Noah had stopped crying. That frightened her more than the noise. She rubbed his hands between hers. "Stay with me." His eyes opened briefly. "You have your father's stubbornness," she whispered. "Use it." She could no longer feel 2 fingers on her left hand. Her feet were numb. She pulled the blanket tighter around Noah and began talking, not because he understood, but because silence felt dangerous. She told him about Daniel's wooden train. She described the orchard in spring, though she had not seen it flower in years. She told him Luke believed the trees were still alive. The beam above them shifted. Dust fell across the blanket. Evelyn looked toward the blocked opening. Luke. Only the storm answered. She closed her eyes. For one terrible moment she imagined him lying somewhere between the cottage and the mansion already covered by snow. Noah moved weakly against her. Evelyn pressed her lips to his forehead. "He promised." She said the words to herself. "Your father promised." Outside, Luke reached the cottage ruins. The roof had collapsed almost completely. Only the chimney and part of the eastern wall remained standing. "Evelyn," he shouted. A faint voice answered below. Luke dropped to his knees and began clearing boards. Isaac and the stable hands joined him. They found the oak beam across the cellar hatch. One man wedged the iron bar beneath it while the others looped rope around the timber. Luke braced his injured shoulder against the beam. Isaac saw the blood on his shirt. "Use the other side. There is no room." They pulled. The beam rose slightly, then fell. From below came Noah's weak cry. Luke's face changed. Again, they reset the rope. Isaac planted both feet against the broken floor. The stable hands pulled until the rope cut through their gloves. Luke pushed upward with his shoulder. The beam lifted. Wood cracked beneath it. "Hold it!" Isaac shouted. Luke's knees shook. The opening widened by several inches. Evelyn pushed the crate toward the gap. "I cannot reach him through that." Luke looked at the unstable roof above them. Another pull might bring the remaining wall down. He lowered himself beside the opening. "Give him to me. I cannot lift him high enough." Luke reached through. His fingers touched the wool blanket, then slipped. The beam groaned above his back. Isaac strained against the rope. "Luke, hold it." Luke reached deeper. His hand found the cold metal edge of the dented milk tin. It was still wedged beneath the crate, holding one corner above the icy water. He gripped the crate and pulled it closer. Evelyn lifted Noah from below. Luke caught the blanket. A moment later, Noah was against his chest. The child's face was pale, but his eyes opened. Luke made a sound that was half sob and half breath. He pressed Noah beneath his coat. "Get Evelyn!" The men raised the beam again. Evelyn climbed through the narrow opening with Isaac pulling from above. As her shoulders cleared the hatch, the eastern wall shifted. "Move!" Isaac shouted. They stumbled away as stone and timber collapsed into the cellar. Luke covered Noah with his body. Snow and dust filled the air. When it cleared, the place where Evelyn and Noah had been trapped was buried completely. No one spoke. Evelyn looked at the ruined cottage, then at Luke holding Noah. Luke reached for her. His hand shook against her face. "You stayed. So did you." Isaac looked toward the mansion. "We need to move." The rope remained tied between them. Luke secured Noah beneath his shirt and coat so the child rested against his skin. Isaac wrapped a blanket around Evelyn, but she could not stand without support. "My feet," she said. "I cannot feel them." Luke placed her arm across his shoulders. His injured side nearly gave way. Isaac moved to take her weight. Luke shook his head. "Keep the rope tight." They began descending the ridge. The storm struck them from the side. Snow closed around their legs. Isaac led with the rope while the stable hands followed behind. Evelyn stumbled. Luke held her upright. "You have to move." "I am trying. Move for Noah." She looked at the small shape beneath his coat. Then she stepped again. Halfway down the ridge, her knees failed completely. Luke caught her before she fell face first into the snow. Isaac turned. "We carry her together." Luke looked at Noah. Isaac understood. He lifted Evelyn beneath one arm while Luke supported the other side. They moved several yards. Evelyn's head dropped. Luke touched her face. "Stay awake. I am tired." "No." His voice sharpened. "You do not get to sleep here." She opened her eyes. "You sound like me. Someone has to." They reached the final field. The mansion lights glowed faintly through the storm. Evelyn could no longer walk. Isaac took Noah from Luke and secured him beneath his own coat. Luke lifted Evelyn. Pain tore through his shoulder, but he did not stop. She tried to protest. "Put me down." "No, you will fall. Then I will stand again." He carried her across the final stretch. Twice he went to one knee. Twice he rose. The servants opened the mansion doors and ran into the snow. Hands reached for Evelyn. Hands reached for Noah. Luke crossed the threshold and collapsed onto the great hall rug. The house filled with movement. Blankets were warmed near the fire. Water was heated. Noah was wrapped and placed against Isaac's chest while a servant rode through the storm toward the nearest physician. Evelyn lay near the hearth. Her dress was frozen at the hem. Her hands were white and still. Luke knelt beside her. A housekeeper tried to move him. "Your shoulder needs attention." He did not look away from Evelyn. "Help her first." Hours passed. The physician arrived shortly before dawn. He examined Noah, then Evelyn, then Luke. The child was cold and weak, but his breathing remained steady. Evelyn had frostbite in 2 fingers and severe exhaustion. Luke's shoulder was badly strained and 3 ribs were bruised. No one died. The words moved through the house like warmth. As dawn spread over the snow-covered ridge, the storm finally weakened. Evelyn opened her eyes. The fire had burned low. Luke sat beside the hearth with Noah sleeping against his chest. A bandage crossed his shoulder. His free hand still held hers. She moved her fingers. Luke woke immediately. "You came back," she whispered. He looked at Noah. "I promised him." Then his eyes returned to hers. "And I could not lose you." Evelyn turned her hand within his and held on. Outside bells sounded faintly from the lower road. Luke rose and carried Noah toward the window. Figures were climbing the ridge through the deep snow. Miners came first with shovels over their shoulders. Railroad workers followed with ropes and tools. Mrs. Harper walked beside the retired teacher carrying a basket covered with cloth. At the front of them, Amos Bell drove a small wagon loaded with firewood blankets and wooden crates of milk. The people who had once turned their faces away now crossed the buried fields toward Whitmore House. Isaac opened the front doors before they could knock. Cold air swept into the great hall as miners, railroad workers, widows, shopkeepers, and children crowded beneath the stone archway. Snow covered their shoulders. Their boots left dark pools across the polished floor. No one apologized for the mud. Amos Bell entered last, carrying a wooden crate against his chest. Luke stood near the window with Noah asleep in his arms. His shoulder was bound beneath his shirt, and every breath still pulled against his bruised ribs. Amos placed the crate near the fire. Inside were 6 tins of milk. Luke looked at him. "I did not order these." Amos removed his hat. "No, then who paid for them?" Amos stared into the fire. The store did. Luke waited. Amos shifted his weight. "I have spent 30 years believing that a ledger tells the whole truth about a man, what he owes, what he owns, whether he can be trusted." His eyes moved toward Noah. "I may have left out a few columns." Luke said nothing. Amos placed his hat beneath one arm. "The milk is not charity. Consider it a correction." Luke looked down at the sleeping child. Then he offered Amos his uninjured hand. Amos took it. Around them, the great hall filled with quiet work. Mrs. Harper organized food in the kitchen. The retired teacher wrapped Evelyn's hands in fresh cloth. Miners carried firewood inside. Railroad men laid ropes and shovels near the entrance. Children who had once watched Evelyn's carriage from the mud now stood beneath chandeliers, staring upward with open mouths. Evelyn rested near the hearth beneath several blankets. She watched them enter. Some had crossed the ridge because she had offered work. Some came because Luke had defended the dead miners. Others came because a child had nearly frozen beneath a ruined house. None of them had been invited. That morning, Whitmore House held more life than it had in 20 years. The physician ordered Evelyn to remain in bed for several days, but by the second afternoon, Isaac found her sitting in the library with county maps spread across her lap. "You are told to rest," he said. "I am sitting. You are told to sleep. I have slept. For 20 minutes. That was sufficient." Isaac took the map from her hands. Evelyn looked toward the door. Where is Luke in the kitchen arguing with Mrs. Harper about what she believes he needs another bowl of stew? And he disagrees. He has already eaten 2. Then Mrs. Harper is correct. Isaac folded the map. The cottage is gone. Evelyn's expression changed. How much remains the chimney, part of the eastern wall, several foundation stones, the cellar buried? She looked toward the northern windows and the orchard. Most of the trees survived. Luke entered carrying Noah. His left arm remained in a sling. Noah rested against his right shoulder, wrapped in one of the blankets Evelyn had purchased at Bell's Mercantile. "The western trees are standing," Luke said. Evelyn looked at him. "You walked to the ridge I rode in the wagon. The physician said you should remain inside. He said the same to you." Isaac left the room before either could involve him. Luke lowered Noah into a basket beside the fire. Evelyn watched him struggle with one hand. She moved to help, but pain crossed her face as she stood. Luke reached toward her. Both stopped when they realized neither was capable of supporting the other. Evelyn sat again. Luke placed Noah in the basket and pulled a chair beside her. For a moment they listened to the fire. "I saw the cottage," he said. "I am sorry." Luke looked at his bandaged hand. "It was wood and stone. It was your home. It was the first place Noah slept without wind coming through the walls." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "And now it is gone." Luke turned toward the window. "No, the chimney is still there." She studied his face. "You intend to rebuild around it?" "Yes, on disputed land, on the land I agreed to restore. Randall has not withdrawn his claim, neither have I." Evelyn leaned back. "You nearly died there." "So did you. That is not an argument for returning. No. It is an argument for building it correctly." A small smile touched her face. "You are very difficult to protect." Luke looked at Noah. "I have had the same thought about you." The rebuilding began 3 days later. Luke was not permitted to lift timber, so he stood near the ruined chimney and directed the work. The miners followed his measurements. Railroad carpenters cut beams beside the orchard. Women from the labor camp prepared meals over an outdoor stove. Children gathered nails, dropped in the snow, and placed them into tin cups. Amos provided materials at cost. When Luke asked how he could afford it, Amos opened a new page in the mercantile ledger. At the top he had written Milk and Firewood Fund. Beneath the title were the names of customers who had contributed money, supplies, or labor. Some gave $20. Some gave 1 coin. One entry read half a sack of beans. Another read 4 hours with a saw. Luke ran his finger down the page. Who started this? Amos adjusted his spectacles. A woman in a fox fur collar. Luke remembered the customer who had turned away from him near the stove. She did not leave her name. Perhaps she was not ready to see it written. The new ranch house rose slowly from the stone foundation. Luke insisted that the original fireplace remain at the center. One afternoon, Evelyn stood before it while workers raised a wall around her. "Everything else is new," she said. "Why keep the damaged stone?" Luke placed his hand against the blackened surface. It held through the storm. "It is cracked. So are we." Evelyn looked at him. Luke moved his hand away. "A crack does not always mean something has failed. Sometimes it only shows where the weight was carried." Evelyn touched the stone. "Then leave it." While the house took shape, Evelyn's attorney continued searching the county records. The altered survey could not be defeated by suspicion alone. They needed someone who had seen the original boundary. The witness came forward in February. His name was Walter Graves, a retired territorial surveyor living outside Bozeman. He arrived at Whitmore House carrying a leather case filled with field notebooks. He had marked the original northern line 17 years earlier. Randall's document placed the boundary almost 300 feet east of Walter's measurements. Walter opened his notebook before Evelyn, Luke, and the county attorney. "The line on Crow's map was added later," he said. "That is not my handwriting, and that is not where I placed the marker." "Can you prove it?" the county attorney asked. Walter removed a small brass compass from the case. The original marker was set beside a granite shelf beneath the western pines. "If it has not been removed, my initials will be beneath the base." The men dug through snow the following morning. They found the marker exactly where Walter described. His initials remained cut into the stone. The boundary claim began collapsing before Randall's attorney could reach the courthouse. The mine investigation followed. At first, only 3 workers agreed to testify. Then a 4th arrived. Then 12. Men described warped beams, ignored warnings and orders to continue production while the western shaft groaned around them. The foreman claimed he had acted alone. Luke produced the copied inspection notes. A purchasing clerk produced invoices showing that Randall's company had ordered cheaper timber despite written objections. The mother of 17-year-old Samuel Reed stood before the territorial examiner holding her son's work cap. She did not cry. She simply asked why 3 days of production had been worth more than 3 lives. No one in the room answered her. Randall was never charged with murder. The law did not reach that far. But the Empire mine was closed until every support could be replaced. Families of the dead received settlements. Randall lost his council seat, several investors withdrew, and the bank that once refused Evelyn's school project canceled his largest credit line. His black carriage disappeared from Helena before spring. Luke watched it leave from the steps of Bell's Mercantile. Evelyn stood beside him. "Do you feel satisfied?" she asked. "No, neither do I." Luke looked toward the rail camp. 3 men are still dead. Evelyn slipped her gloved hand into his. "Yes." They stood together until the carriage vanished beyond the hills. The workers' school opened in early summer. Evelyn sold Whitmore House to complete the construction without bank financing. The decision spread through Helena faster than any rumor about Luke. For 2 weeks, people came to see whether the sale was real. They watched furniture carried through the front doors. They watched silver packed into wooden cases. They watched Evelyn leave the mansion where she had lived as a wife, a mother, and a widow. On her final morning there, she walked upstairs alone. Daniel's room remained open. Sunlight crossed the blue quilt. Dust no longer covered the wooden train. Evelyn had cleaned each piece and placed them in a small box. She stood beside the bed. "I thought keeping this room unchanged meant I was keeping you near me." The house was silent, but it no longer felt hostile. She lifted Daniel's coat from behind the door. It was too small for Noah and always would be. Evelyn folded it carefully and placed it in the box. "I am taking you with me," she whispered. "Just not like this." She closed the box and walked downstairs. Isaac waited beside a smaller carriage. Her belongings occupied only 2 wagons. The rest had been sold. Evelyn looked once at the tall windows and marble steps. Then she entered the carriage without turning back again. Her new home stood near the northern ridge, close enough that she could hear hammers from the ranch house and children from the schoolyard. The school had 2 classrooms, a warm nursery, a kitchen, and a workshop. The retired teacher accepted the position of headmistress. Mrs. Harper supervised the nursery and refused to let anyone call her director. Luke built the desks. He designed them with lower shelves so children could keep books away from muddy floors. He also built a long workbench for evening carpentry lessons. On opening morning, nearly 60 children gathered outside. Some wore shoes donated through Bell's Fund. Some carried lunches wrapped in cloth. Several held younger brothers or sisters who would stay in the nursery while they studied. Evelyn stood near the door as the first child entered. It was the barefoot girl she had seen carrying water through the labor camp. Her name was Mary Collins. She wore brown boots that were slightly too large. Mary stopped before Evelyn. "Do we have to pay? No. Do we have to work here? You have to learn." Mary considered this. "What if I am not good at it?" The headmistress appeared behind Evelyn. "Then you will be bad at it until you are better." Mary smiled and walked inside. The first object placed on the nursery shelf was the dented milk tin. Luke had found it beneath the ruins of the cellar after the snow melted. One side had been crushed further by the fallen beam. Rust marked the bottom where it had stood in icy water. Evelyn cleaned it but did not repair the dents. Beneath it, Amos placed a small wooden sign. "Take what your child needs. Return kindness when you can." Luke read the words twice. "You wrote this." Amos adjusted a row of bottles. The teacher corrected the spelling. Luke looked at him. Amos avoided his eyes. That evening, after the last child left, Evelyn entered the workshop. Luke stood at the bench sanding a piece of red cedar. His shoulder had healed enough for work, though he still favored it when lifting heavy boards. "What are you making?" she asked. "A box. For what?" He nodded toward the small wooden train she carried beneath one arm. Evelyn set it on the table. Luke had made a cedar chest with 2 compartments. He placed Daniel's train in one side. Then he removed Clara's photograph from his pocket and placed it in the other. Evelyn watched him close the lid. "You do not have to hide her. I am not hiding her." Luke opened the box again. "I thought the things we carried might belong in the same place." Evelyn touched Clara's photograph. She was younger than I imagined. She was 28. "Do you still love her?" Luke looked at the photograph. Yes. The answer hurt, though Evelyn had expected it. She turned toward the window. Luke came beside her. "Loving you did not require me to stop." Evelyn's eyes lifted to his. "I was afraid Noah would become the child I lost." "He cannot." She looked down. Luke continued gently. "He can only become the child who found you." From the doorway came a small sound. Noah stood holding the frame, his legs uncertain beneath him. Evelyn knelt. He took one step toward her, then another. Luke held out his hands, but Noah passed him and fell against Evelyn's dress. She laughed as she lifted him. Noah opened one fist. Inside lay the cedar heart Luke had carved months earlier. Evelyn took it from him. Luke smiled. "He has been carrying that all afternoon. He stole it from my table. He may consider it his inheritance." Evelyn held Noah against her and looked at Luke. "This is enough for me." Luke understood what she meant. He did not answer with words. He touched her face and kissed her gently. No audience watched them. No town whispered outside the door. The school stood quiet around them, filled with the scent of chalk cedar milk and clean wood. The orchard flowered that spring. The 3 western trees Luke had refused to cut produced more blossoms than any others on the ridge. He brought Evelyn outside before sunrise. White petals covered the branches. She walked beneath them slowly. "You were right," she said. Luke looked at the trees. "They were alive. That is not what I meant." He turned toward her. Evelyn held the cedar heart inside her palm. "You saw that they needed time." Luke looked toward the ranch house, the school, and Noah playing near Isaac beneath the trees. "So did you." The 5-year agreement remained in place. Luke refused every suggestion that the land be transferred sooner. He restored the orchard, expanded the well, repaired the fences, and hired former miners to work the ranch. He repaid the cost of the early milk $1 at a time, placing each payment into the fund at Bell's Mercantile. Evelyn never told him it was unnecessary. She understood that repayment was not about debt. It was about standing beside her by choice rather than dependence. 5 autumns after the storm, Luke entered the county office and signed the final page of the agreement. The clerk placed the homestead deed before him. $1, the man said. Luke set a silver coin on the desk. The clerk pushed it back. The amount is already recorded. Luke looked toward Evelyn. She stood near the window with Noah, now 6 years old, beside her. Evelyn smiled. Luke left the coin on the desk anyway. That evening he asked Evelyn to walk through the orchard. The trees were heavy with red apples. Fallen leaves covered the ground. At the oldest western tree, Luke stopped. He placed the cedar heart in Evelyn's palm. "The first time I gave you this, all I had was gratitude." Evelyn closed her fingers around it. "And now I have work that is mine, land I earned, a son who runs toward your door before mine." Noah called from the house, asking Isaac where the pie had gone. Luke smiled. "I do not need you to rescue me anymore." Evelyn's expression softened. "I never believed you did." Luke took her hand. "I need you to build the rest with me." He asked her to marry him beneath the branches she had once believed were dead. Evelyn looked at the ranch house, the school beyond it, and the warm light in the windows. Then she looked at Luke. Yes. They married beneath the orchard trees the following spring. Isaac stood beside Luke. Mrs. Harper cried openly and denied it when anyone noticed. Amos brought more food than the guests could eat. The headmistress kept Noah from climbing the tree behind the minister. Families from the rail camp stood beside merchants, miners, teachers, and ranch hands. Some members of the Helena Ladies' Society attended quietly at the back. Margaret Hale approached Evelyn after the ceremony. "I owe you an apology." Evelyn looked at the woman who had once warned her about Luke. "You owe the next person your courage." Margaret nodded. That summer she donated enough money to add a library to the school. Years passed. Luke became known throughout the territory for his ranch and carpentry. Evelyn continued overseeing the school, though she refused to let anyone name it after her. Noah grew tall and strong. He knew Clara's face from the photograph in the cedar box. He knew Daniel's wooden train and the stories Evelyn told about muddy footprints across fine rugs. No one in the house was erased to make room for someone else. Grief remained with them. It simply learned to sit beside laughter. Many years later, Noah entered Bell's Mercantile holding the hand of his young daughter. The store had changed. The shelves were larger. Electric lights had replaced the brass lamps. Amos was gone, but the account ledger remained behind the counter. Near the stove stood a wooden shelf marked Milk and Firewood Fund. Families still took what they needed. Those who could afford it left money for those who could not. Above the shelf sat the dented milk tin. Noah's daughter pointed toward it. "Why does everyone keep an empty can?" Near the fire, Luke and Evelyn sat side by side. Luke's hair had turned white. Evelyn's hand rested inside his. Noah carried his daughter closer. Luke smiled at the child. "Because once your father was hungry, your grandfather was proud, and your grandmother refused to look away." The girl studied the old tin. "Did it save Papa?" Evelyn looked at Luke. Then she looked around the store where a young mother was placing milk into her basket while the clerk quietly turned to another page of the ledger. "No," Evelyn said. She held Luke's hand more tightly. People did. Noah lifted the cedar heart from the shelf and placed it beside the tin. Outside, snow began falling across Helena. Inside, no one turned away.